Hi everyone, welcome back to Long Game, a Heated Rivalry podcast. I am Declan, this is Silvan. We are taking a quick look through one of the books by Rachel Reid that inspired the series. If you aren't aware of it, the Game Changer series is what Heated Rivalry is sort of contained within. So the first book is actually called Game Changers, and this is the story of Scott and Kip. So they are an entirely different story, and they're actually the very first book. So what we've decided to do through a book club in Fable is to go through the book, compare it to the show, and get our thoughts and opinions on, what sort of differences do we like, what things do we not like, how do we find the book compares to the show, and vice versa. So, Sylvan, this is your first time reading Game Changers. What are your general thoughts?
It is. I very much came into this sort of realm having the TV show in the back of my mind, and it very much still has been. So, starting off with Game Changer and reading it, I couldn't help but compare it naturally to the TV
Mm,
show. And so I
yeah.
had to sort of almost suspend both, thinking it's almost they're the same story, but almost two different realms of the same story because they're being told by two different people in a way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that happens a lot with adaptation. A lot of people say when Lord of the Rings came out, it's this super fast-paced, action-packed gem of a movie. It's beautiful, it's amazingly paced. But then they go and they read the book for the first time, and the pacing is a lot slower, a lot more leisurely. There's a lot of different events that go on that aren't included, and the characters are also quite different. So there's always like a bit of whiplash when it comes to adaptation because people can't help but compare one medium to another. Even though any sort of film or TV director will tell you that you simply cannot directly translate something from page to screen. It's just not possible. There's too many little nuances that are lost that you need to compensate for in different ways, and some things that just don't work. I think George R. R. Martin actually put it a great way in terms of like why were certain events left out of the sort of Game of Thrones TV series that were in the books. And he basically says, well, I have an unlimited budget when I'm writing a book. Like, I can include as many dragons and as huge armies, as many battles as I want, because my budget is limitless. When it comes to TV, you need to pay for the CGI for that kind of stuff to happen. So that's just a little aside about adaptations, because I'm going to be very conscious of the fact that people are reading this book for the first time after watching the show, and that you're going to find that a lot of it is a little different.
Exactly. And I'm even thinking about growing up, I read a lot of English classical literature. I read Wuthering Heights, read Thomas Hardy, and those some of those books are, especially Hardy. Hardy is slow. It's
Mm.
very slow paced, and nothing happens for a whole chapter almost. And so coming into sort of film or TV adaptations, you're right, they have constraints. They have a limited number of episodes, for example, 6 episodes for the Heated Rivalry show. And so there are just some things that you're going to lose. But conversely, I think there are things that can be lifted and changed almost for the better.
Do you feel that that was the case with the show compared to the book? Maybe some things were a bit more elevated?
So I think just to preface, we're going to be splitting this episode into two parts. So we're going to do one half of Game Changer this week, and then we'll do so up to chapter 15,
Hmm.
including chapter 15, and then we'll do the second half in the next episode.
Hmm.
So I've only read up until chapter 15. On the whole, and I'm being mindful of the words I'm using because I know people have a real affinity to this intellectual property, whether it's the TV show or the book. I felt the TV show was a little bit more elevated than what I've read so far. And I know people are going to come at me, but I'm happy to be changed in terms of my mind in the second half. I don't know what
Yeah,
you thought.
yeah. I mean, I agree. I think, and this is absolutely no disservice to Rachel Reid. These are her ideas. This is her imagination. She created these really interesting and complicated character arcs for these characters that she's sort of summed up out of nowhere, and she's done a really good job of creating a world, and definitely, you know, props to her for that. But her early writing is not the sort of same standard we're talking about in terms of TV show, which is fine. Whenever she was first publishing these books, she was still a bit more inexperienced. She wasn't as well established as a professional writer, so her earlier works definitely do come across a bit more basic. And then when you try to compare it to something that has had a lot of artistic input from many different sources, taking this source material and uplifting it to something completely different, you know, that's nothing really on Rachel Reid. That's just down to the sheer talent of the sort of showrunners and the people that they managed to get on board to sort of bring their own personal talent, their own touch to sort of bring the story to something else. But you will notice that perhaps the book isn't quite as good as the show. And now keep in mind, we've not read Heated Rivalry yet. So I just mean in terms of Scott and Kip's story. I think in terms of the show, I buy more into them there than perhaps in this book. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves, okay? So let's start off first with the basics. Like, what did you think of first Scott from his book counterpart compared to the TV show?
Well, Scott is blonde
Scott's a blonde,
in the book.
and blondes have more fun.
But I was completely thrown off. I know there's a book cover, but I was trying to suspend myself with the book cover. But the way Scott is described is, I think, a little bit taller. He's blonde, and if you're blonde, you're a lot fairer skinned. And it was really hard for me because I do have this bias because I watched the TV show.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard for me to switch the image of Scott I have from Francois, the actor, to this blonde, heartthrob in the book. And so that was the first thing that really struck me. I was really trying to pivot, and that caused some dissonance within me already. So there are some scenes that I can imagine Scott being blonde, but there are some scenes that match up very closely with the TV show that I just go back and picture Francois in.
Yeah. I think it's because Francois is so magnetic as the character as well. It's very hard to separate them from their sort of book counterpart at that stage. Like, whenever I think of like Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games, I can, even though I read the books first and I loved the books, I literally cannot see anyone else other than Jennifer Lawrence as Katniss Everdeen now, because she so perfectly emulated the character that they're inseparable at this point. So I get that same thing with Francois, because I don't remember Scott being blonde from my first read, because all I see is Francois. And then when I went back and I reread this for the podcast and for the book club, I was like, oh yeah, he's blonde. I completely forgot about that. He's blonde and he's young.
Yes, he's 28.
He's 28, which
As
is
a lot of people,
young, guys. Is young, all right? It's young. Please let me keep that, please.
It's
But
very young, Declan. And we've had up-teen amount of comments about why do you think Scott is so old and why is he in his 40s? Because of the TV show.
yes, exactly. So when discussing that, and whenever I was bringing it up, it was because the TV show makes it clear that he is like a veteran player. He's well respected. They call him old man, like whenever they're in the show. But he's not that old in the book. In the book, he's quite young. He has like another 10 years in him, at least, of playing, which is interesting for the difficulties that him and Kip are going to encounter, because there's a lot of secrecy and staying hidden in this book and in the TV show. But in the TV show, the idea is that Scott only has a couple more years of this, just a couple more years, and then he's done and he can retire. And maybe they can then pick up the relationship at that point and do all that. But in the book, Scott's 28, which means Kip would have a decade at least of this, which is a lot. That's a lot different. It's a much bigger ask. um,
Yeah.
and a lot more unrealistic, I think, but delusional maybe. Whereas in the show, I think aging him up makes a bit more sense.
I think it worked. It definitely worked. And I think I know that, Jacob Tierney chose Francois for a reason. I mean, let alone the abs, for goodness sakes.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I don't know anyone else who has abs like him, but I think aging him, you're right, was a really smart decision to do because it elevates the story in terms of the finality of it or their
Mm.
journey in a way. And so I enjoyed reading about a younger Scott and what that might look like because for me what that did was it gave me more grace towards that character. This is a young guy. This is a guy who's making mistakes. And in fact, I didn't feel quite so irritated with book Scott than I
Mhm.
did TV show Scott.
Mm. He's a lot more naive in the book, and it comes
Yeah.
across a lot more. You can tell his inexperience, and I think when you do get those interactions between him and Kip in the book, you can tell that Scott is just as sort of out of the loop as Kip is, um, and that he doesn't quite know how to interact within this relationship. It's very sweet, so it is.
It feels juvenile in a not a critical way, but in a way that feels like they're teenagers rather than
Mm,
20-something-year-olds.
yeah, it's more endearing, so it is, rather than, oh, this guy, like, why is he behaving like this? He's nearly 40. Like, it's that sort of thing. Um, but I do, it's, I wonder how they make these decisions. Like, Jacob Tierney is probably aware that there was a trade-off there where, maybe we're going to make Scott seem a little less sympathetic if we age him up, but in our ways, we're also able to make the conflict within the relationship seem more reasonable and more realistic. Um, so I would like to know his sort of creative process for figuring out decisions like that. That would be very, very interesting, I think.
I want to see what Jacob Tierney's whiteboard looks like when he's
Yeah,
developing the story
it's
and what he's
conspiracy
doing
board.
currently. Yeah, right. And what he's doing currently with season 2, for example. I
Yeah,
think I think it was smart to change Scott's age because in a way then you have these two couples running in parallel, but there's a difference between Scott and Kip because of the age factor as well. You don't have two different couples going through the same thing at similar ages. It would feel repetitive and too coincidental in a way.
yeah, I agree. Um, I think the differences that I see between the show and the book in relation to his character really do make sense. Um, but hmm, how did you find Kip?
So what I found was, which was really humorous actually, and I'm physically holding the book up now because and people are going to roast me for this, but I make notes in the margin. And so I
The
know people don't
feeling,
like that. But it's my book. I'm not going to lend it to anyone. If they do, they can read my notes. I don't mind. Um, But for Kib, what I found in one of these sort of forwards that Rachel writes and who she dedicates it to, she dedicates the book to Matt, of course. But then at the end, she also says, and also to the random gap model, who was my physical reference for Kip. And she's right. Kip looks like a model, let's be honest, in the TV
yeah,
show as
he
well.
does. He's this gorgeous looking man, perfectly proportioned in every single way. Um, and has like a real sense of warmth about him as well and sort of youthfulness. I really like the casting decisions in relation to Kip. I think he really does bring him alive in this book or in the TV show from the book. Um, but a lot of people don't like Kip in the book.
Interesting. I wonder if there's something coming in the second half of the book that's going to make me not like him, because I'm not there yet. He's somewhat, at least up until chapter 15, he's a little flighty, a little indecisive, but I haven't gotten to the main conflict yet. So
Hmm.
I'm still very much in that honeymoon period between
Yeah.
Scott and Kip.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear your opinion of Kip after you've read the second half of the book. I think that'll be interesting. But for this first half, I think you're right. There is something quite blighty about him. He's very inconsistent. He's not very motivated, and he's sort of reserved to like failure in a sense, as he views it in himself. Um, and you find that a lot of his friends are actually the ones that are sort of pushing him along, sort of like shoving him out the door. Do that thing, go do that thing. We've done the thing for you because you refuse to do it. It's that sort of he's a very passive protagonist. So he is. And that can work in certain situations and in certain stories. Um I think it works as a storytelling tool in this book. Because very much Kip is getting swept up in this. Like he is just going right along with whatever Scott wants because he is so enamored with him. And it does turn into love, obviously, but that initial um acceptance of the dynamic of their relationship, I think was very interesting and very telling of his character. Um, yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice that does make sense as the book goes on.
Yeah, I very much feel like Kip is nailed down in terms of characteristics and his looks. Like, I don't imagine anyone else apart from Robbie from the TV show, like I do with Scott, for example. But what I think about Kip, at least so far, is again, this is a very young person navigating post uni life. Like, how many of us felt like we didn't know what to do after our degrees? And I know
Yeah.
I worked really weird jobs after my degree, sort of trying to get a foot into the industry that I'm in now. And I kind of sympathize with him for that.
Mm,
Yes, I didn't work as a barista in a smoothie shop, but I was a waiter in a hotel, and a very bad waiter at that. So I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for what Kip is going through, because I can think back to how I tried to navigate that, and I navigated it really. It felt clumsy. I was just falling into things.
yeah. He's a very good representation of what it's like to be in your early 20s. Like you're still living, a lot of people still living from home. You're usually in a job you don't want to do. You realize that there are no graduate jobs and that uni is not sort of what it's painted to be. And you're stuck in a whole lot of debt and no idea sort of how to progress your life at that point. After I left uni, I went and worked in a bar for 6 months. That was, it's just typical. And I will never use my degree in a professional manner outside of like analysis and stuff like this here. Obviously, it's useful in different ways, but I will never become like a director or anything like that. There, like that's not going to happen. But I do like the way that Rachel captures that sort of feeling of being in your early 20s and having no direction. Um, but I feel like people in Kip's life are a lot more pushy of what he should be doing. Like they're much more active in pushing him towards his potential. So they are, and I do like that. His friends, he has even more friends in the book, by the way. His friends are very actively pushing him to do stuff.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I was just reminded of sort of Gilmore Girls and how Rory stumbles after uni, especially in season 7, but even in the revival when they come back, like I think 10 years later or something, she's still stumbling. And it kind of made me feel like, oh, okay, it's okay to really be a bit lost in your field, and it doesn't always come. They sold us a lie, Declan. They said,
They
go get a
did.
degree, you'll get a job afterwards. They lied.
Don't get me started, right? All they were doing was trying to improve the unemployment numbers because if you're a student, you're not counted as unemployed. And then you come out, and all these graduate jobs that they talked about don't exist because
No.
people retire later, which means these companies don't need skill people as much, and you're pushed into it whenever you're like. If you don't know, me and Sylvan are in the UK. We um, in UK schools, you're really, really pushed into university if you are anyway academically competent. Like, you don't even need to be that smart, to be honest. Like, you will be taken into university if you really want to go. Um, and most of the degrees are, in terms of like a career prospect, a bit pointless. So they are. Like, Skip constantly talks about how pointless his degree is. Um, you know, the best thing he can hope for is like become a history teacher or something like that. That's what he believes. But his friends are pushing him to like further like his aspirations, like go back, do your masters, like you could become like a museum curator or something along those lines. And um, they really do try to push him to use that. But for the vast majority of people, in reality, if you're doing a history degree, it's absolutely worthless to you unless you're becoming like a teacher. So yeah, those big jobs are typically gotten through like placements and through like actual experience and being there and connections and stuff like that. That's usually how those jobs actually go. It very rarely goes to a graduate that just got a university. Um, so this idea of the sort of the doom of the graduate, where you come out and you realize that there's nothing really waiting for you, and this might have been a little bit of a waste of time. That's captured so well for Kip in this book, but it also captures the way out of it, which is to push on, go for opportunities where you see them. Maybe you just need to be better educated. Maybe you need to be more focused or have a more specific sort of niche in your field that you can chase after, which is fair, or just throw out your degree and do something else completely different, which is what I did.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you're a lot more eloquent than I am because I was just going to say marry rich, which is kind of what he's kind of doing up until chapter 15. Like, he keeps talking about his multimillionaire boyfriend. Like, I would not stop him.
I would be an amazing stay-at-home husband. I really would. Like, I
I'll do.
I will have the housework done within an hour and a half. Takes my boyfriend like 6 hours, and I'll come home and there'll still be stuff that's not done. I will be a very efficient house husband, I think.
Just do Pilates every day, it's not a bad life.
Oh no, I now have 5 hours of my day to fill after I've done literally every task to do. Oh, awful. Anyway, I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
um, and you talk about Kip's sort of history degree and his background, and in the book it alludes that Kip's father is of the same sort of background, or he studied the same thing. It's not, they don't nail it completely, but I
Hmm.
feel like there's a shared common interest there between him and his father. And so I
Yeah.
wonder if there is sort of this sort of bridging of these two characters because of that, and that's
Mm.
why his father gets him, because we don't know what his dad does in the TV
Yeah.
show. But speaking of Kip's father, we get the introduction. Kip has a mother and a sister.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Kip has a much wider family circle in the book, um, which sort of works for showing how different he is to Scott in terms of what he has. When you compare Kip's dad from the book to the TV show, I much prefer the dad in the TV show. I think there's more of a warmth, there's more of an active role in Kip's life. The dad is sort of like a reoccurring background character in the book. Um, and also he has extended family as well. He has a mother, he has a sister. Um, and he also seems to have a wider circle of friends. So he has a much more active social life than perhaps Scott does. Um, but also, did you notice that Scott has more people in his life in the book than in the show?
He does. He has a lot more hockey people around.
Yeah, and they're actual friends. Like, you get the
Yes.
sense that they're proper friends. And Scott talks about his mother as well. So he does. Like, he had a mother who passed away whenever he was a teenager. Whereas in the show, it's very much implied that Scott has sort of nearly always been an orphan. Or am I wrong in that?
I
I
think, yeah, you're right. I think his parents died in the TV show when he was young. I can't remember exactly what age.
yeah,
It was
yeah.
very young.
So yeah, in both cases, he's still orphaned, and that still matters. But I think in the show, his loneliness is much more of a pressing issue. So it is. His sort of radical action towards Kip, this sort of insta love that he has for Kip, is a lot more believable in that sense because he's so isolated. That now that he's found someone that he connects with, he's like clinging to the connection. He's like anxious attachment, like, oh my God, I can't let you go, blah, 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 blah. Like, I'm overlooking all our issues because I need to have you. And in the book, that's not very present. He has other people.
He feels more balanced in the book in that way. And we also get a bit of backstory whereby we learn that Scott was raised by his mum, so single parent family. And then when she died, that's when he was quite literally orphaned. And so it's interesting to hear a bit more of that story for Scott. It amplifies it in a way, where he's receiving love from somebody he's going to grab onto and he's going to hold on to it for literal dear life.
Yeah. So I think it also helps with the timeline of their relationship as well. So in the show, did you feel like they had like months together?
Yeah, I would say so. It felt like a longer period of time in which they met and they actually, to the gala scene, to them hooking up, to them then repeatedly hooking up. Whereas in the book, at least up until what I've read, Kip says it's been weeks. It's only been weeks when he's talking to Elena.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like, wait a minute. Like, they are acting like two fools in love. They are acting like they're 12 years old and they've never had a boyfriend. And this is their first boyfriend who they're saying, I love you to, and jumping into bed together. There's no judgment there, but they are very much. And one of the notes that I actually wrote in my margins was, is this love or lust?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing. So there's lots of things going on here, and I just want to pick some of it apart. First of all, this is a very common sort of, I'm almost going to call it a trope in romance, and probably just general romance as well, where people are confessing love to each other after knowing each other for days, if you're lucky, weeks. I find this a personal pet peeve. I don't like this. To form proper emotional connection, it takes longer than that typically. Obviously, you have your exceptions of sort of love at first sight, and you have that. But if it's not executed in a way that is sort of believable, then you can't really enjoy that sort of trope. But in general, oh my God, if you're an romance writer, just extend it out. Just make a few more weeks pass. Just throw a month in there. It's okay. All you need to do is literally write, and a month later, and you have a bit more of a believable timescale for a relationship that I can buy into. It's not you don't need to squeeze it all into like a few days. Please don't do that. But if you consider the fact that in the book they're a lot younger, and this is Scott's first relationship. This is his first same-sex relationship that he's ever had. So he is going to behave like a teenager because he has no prior experience whatsoever. And that I find is more believable in the book than perhaps it is in the show, where he is a mature man, who he might never have had a relationship. That's true. It's still true in the show as well, but because you can visually see that he is a much older, mature person, and you get the sense he's also emotionally more mature, um, you struggle with the way that he behaves towards Kip because you're like, can I really justify this? Whereas in the book, it's a lot more believable.
Yeah. And when we had Eliza on the podcast a few sessions ago,
Mhm.
she talked about Scott being, a believable love bomber. And now that I've read
Mhm.
it, it makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
He love bombs Kip.
yeah, 100%. And he's not really doing it intentionally. He just doesn't understand that it's not appropriate. And I think you'll find now, as you continue on in the book, that this is going to become like a sticking point with them. Because Kip's not stupid. So he's not. He's enjoying the ride and he is in love. But he's also self-aware of how easily Scott gives him things that he would never be able to achieve within, like, if Kip spent a year working and saving and doing nothing else, he might be able to afford one of Scott's suits. Whereas Scott just gives it away for free, offers to buy him a new designer suit, which would cost Kip thousands of dollars and endless months of work and time. And Scott gives it so freely, like it's nothing. And to Scott, it isn't. To Scott, it is nothing. But this is his first relationship, so he didn't understand.
And I agree. And to Kip's credit, when Scott does offer him the suit in the book, he says, "I'll buy you a new suit." And Kip's like, "No, like absolutely not." He refuses a lot of things that Scott offers initially, at least up until what I've read. But then their compromise is, well, he's like, "We'll take one of mine and have it tailored." And I think that was a good compromise. Whereas when Scott in the TV show just gives him what looks like a very new suit in the wardrobe, that gave me, I had to recoil from that. I was like, oh, for my man or something like that. And then he had an S. I was like, one, you just bought him a designer suit, tux or whatever. Two, the symbolism of that tux being in the closet.
In the closet is, that's excellent visual storytelling. Absolutely excellent. Yeah, fantastic. That's honestly an advantage of TV as well, is you can do visual storytelling. You don't need to say it in the book. And you can sort of let the audience come to their own conclusions. But yeah, such a fantastic contrast. But you're right. The fact that Kip does refuse him is meaningful for his character. Kip wants to earn what he gets. Like, I think because he's put so much time and effort into it, the idea that Scott is coming in and just making all that seem pointless and worthless, completely unintentionally, of course, but he's almost devaluing his work and what he's done and his efforts, in a way that you would struggle to articulate for Kip, because Scott is very rich, and he has been very rich for a long time. Probably since he was a professional player, he's always been he's always done professional sports. So from like the age of 18, Scott has had a lot of money. Though the book does make it clear that Scott comes from a poor background.
Yeah.
So he understands sort of what Kip is going through, in the sense that how hard it is to not have certain things and how difficult it is to struggle for something like that. But he doesn't seem to understand that just handing it to somebody that's already working for it devalues what they're doing. And I think that's an interesting little sort of mini conflict between the two.
Yeah, and as you were talking, two things came to me. So the first one was, there's a part very early on in the book where Scott thinks, what would it be like for Kip to just stay at home all day? And I was like, oh, and I put wag in sorry. Right? Like, I wrote wag in big letters, question mark. So Scott has this fantasy of having a stay-at-home husband, in a way. As I know we joked about it before, but I would never do that. It's a fantasy. And so Scott almost has this illusion of, he wants Kip to be there all the time, to be at his apartment. And we see this in the TV show. And that's what irked me in the TV show. Now, when it came into the book, it immediately took me back to the TV show. And I was like, this doesn't sit well with me. And so there's all of that. But secondly, there's a point where they've hooked up. I think it's early in the morning. Scott wants to have sex again. And he's like, call in sick from work. And Kip's like, I can't. And yes, Kip's job, maybe not as important as Scott is. He's not responsible
Hmm.
for a whole
Yeah.
team, a whole industry, perhaps. But Kip's like, I can't call in sick. And he's like, well, just go in late then. And he's like, no. And so I really respected Kip for really standing those boundaries and
Yeah.
holding on to those, because how it's very easy, you're in the it's the morning, you're cuddling, you're like, oh, I don't want to go to work, don't go to work. And it's very easy to say, yeah, I won't go in because you want me to stay in. But and Kip, this is where Kip again holds his own. He's like, well, you're going to practice later. What am
Hmm.
I going to do?
Yeah, I can definitely appreciate Kip's sort of resilience and resisting sort of Scott's very, very easy, um, what's the sort of word I'm looking for? He's making things very easy for Kip to give into. Like, he could very easily give into this life and live as a sort of shadow of himself, and have all these privileges and all this money and basically the freedom to sort of do whatever he wants as long as it's not be with Scott in public, which is incredibly sad because Scott is identifying that he wants Kip there. He knows he likes having him there. But for Kip, he's like, I don't know, there's something in Kip where he wants to be someone, he wants to achieve something, he wants to have a sense of purpose, and it needs to be beyond just something to Scott. He needs to be his own individual, with his own ambitions and his own dreams and his own pursuits. Like, I know rich people love to tell poor people that money does not buy happiness. Ugh. Nonsense. Well, it's not complete nonsense, is what I'm trying to say. It buys you the freedom to do what you want. But when you have that freedom, sometimes if you don't find a purpose, it will make you deeply unhappy. So when you have the freedom to do anything, it's important what you decide to do with that time. And I think Kip is sort of looking at that in a sense. It's like, I could have all my problems solved, but what would I do? Who would I be? What is my purpose? What's my ambition? Like, what's going to be my drive then if I just let Scott buy my life out? Right? Like, it wouldn't be a fulfilling life for either of them in the long run. And it's waiting for Kip to sort of have that realization because he's automatically doing this stuff. But I don't think he's aware of it. I think it's subconscious what he's doing.
I agree, because it's so easy to get swept up in the romance of it all. It's so easy to make yourself available, to Scott's schedule, because arguably he's the one who has a more regimented schedule because he travels and he plays. And so keeping yourself available or making sure you have a shift on the day that Scott has a game. So Scott has a smoothie. It's much easier to mold yourself around somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because Kip is so enamored with him that he is definitely the good looks, the money, and the obviously personality and the attraction. They're winning Scott a lot of leeway here with Kip. Kip is definitely compromising a lot more than he probably would for other people, because it is Scott. Um, but it's where is the limit to that? Because there is one. Um, so as the book goes on, I think you'll find that you're going to start to hit some of those sort of speed bumps at that point. Um, but yeah, no, their dynamic is interesting at this point in the book, and you can sort of see Kip pushing back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of pushing back, I want to go into maybe some of the supporting characters, like Elena,
Mm.
for example. What was your impression of Elena from the book versus the TV show?
TV show is she's a much more complete character. I think. I think in the book, she's an important influence in Kip's life, but she is not actively sort of in the story. In the TV show, she plays a much more important role. She is the catalyst for forcing the two of them to confront what they're not dealing with. She's a vital part of that plot. In the book, I feel like if you took Elena out of it, Kip would still be making the same decisions. Whereas in the TV show, it feels like she pushes him to reflect properly. In the book, I don't get that as much, so I don't. So I do like her role in the book. I like the dynamic that they have, that they grew up when they were kids, and that they have this really close relationship. I like the idea as well that they would definitely be dating each other if Kip was straight, um, because they just like each other that much. But unfortunately, the stars didn't align. Um, so yeah, I do like their dynamic. I like the friendship. I do feel like she's an important part of Kip's life, but I feel she is better utilized and she's better fully realized in the TV show.
I agree. And it just goes to show how you can adapt a character from a written novel and add layers to that character.
Hmm.
So Elena in the TV show is much more of a force. It forces these two characters to come to a realization. You know, the whole speech about you deserve sunshine and so does he.
Mm,
Like, that is just pure gold, but you wouldn't have that dialogue if you didn't have a well written and forced character
yeah.
in the book. And so I can see how Jacob Tierney sort of taken elements and just tweaked it
Mm,
and tweaked it for a good cause to
yeah, yeah.
to push the story along. They're not just
Mm,
characters for the sake of having characters, they're characters with a purpose. And
yeah.
that sounds like the Miss World trope, like beauty with a purpose, but regardless.
But I think that's part of his strategy for um, adapting the book is he is taking elements of characters who he's not going to include and putting them all into the one character so that you have the efficiency of basically having more fully realized people because he has a tighter schedule than Rachel Reid does. She can have the more casual characters, the ones that come in and out, don't play a massive role, but are just part of the background, they're part of the world building, so they are. Um, whereas Jacob Tierney doesn't have the time for that. He has a very tight schedule, especially for these two, because they're fitting an entire book into one episode. And well, one episode and a tiny bit of another one. Whereas with the whole Heated Rivalry book, he has like a whole 5 episodes to tell that story. So he is working with a very tight schedule and he's trying to make characters much more efficient. So they are. Um, because I'm pretty sure after this in the TV show, like after the events you read up to, where they go to the sort of ball or whatever it is, the
The
event,
gala,
yeah, the gala, they have their fight right after that. So they do.
the
Whereas
conflict.
I'm telling you now that in the book that doesn't happen. That's not
So,
when the next that's not the conflict, so it's not. I
no,
don't think that's a
in
spoiler.
in fact, no, it's not. I don't think so. In fact, what you do is you get the opposite in the book. In chapter 15, they tell each other that they love each other for the first
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So you get
It
the opposite actually
it
happening.
brings them closer and Elena in the book doesn't seem to be as challenging of Scott either. So he isn't. Which I think is worthy of note, especially because she is so confronting in the TV show. More appropriately so. I think Elena's the better friend in the TV show, whereas in the book she's sort of playing along with this farce. And it is a farce at this point. Like he's there at this party for him. He wants to be there with him. And they can't, and Scott is thinking this is okay, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous of what is going on at this point. He's effectively closeted Kip again. And it's a massive issue. It's a huge sticking point. And the TV show Elena seems to grab on to how important this actually is. That this is not good, guys. You need to figure this out now. Because if you don't, you're just gonna hurt yourselves. And the book there is an element of that, but it's definitely not as direct and definitely not as urgent.
Yeah. And speaking to that point, they only had 6 episodes in total, and one of which was predominantly Kip and Scott's storyline. I
Hmm.
wonder how different that might have looked if they had like a 22 or 24 episode season, for example, and how
Yeah.
much they would have padded it out and made that feel longer, or, filled it out a little bit
Mm.
more. So, in a way, I feel like having those 6 episodes really truncated all the filler out.
Yeah, 100%. It trimmed the fat to like the extreme degree, and I think that works with this book. I This book simply wouldn't work, even if it was 6 episodes. It would not work as a translation. There is just not enough in it. Which maybe we'll get onto some criticisms of this book. There is a lot of time in this book spent on sex between Kip and Scott. Um, to the point where it gets boring. And I don't know if you agree with that. What's your thoughts?
We're finally getting to what everyone really wants to hear, right? So, the sex in the book. Now, granted, I have read some sort of novels before. I'm not quite as prolific as you,
Hmm.
but the sex in certain scenes in the book served to build up the tension.
Hmm.
And you could see that and the way they layered it and the way Rachel lays it. There is a point in the book where all they're doing is having sex. And I appreciate it, but at a certain point, it didn't do very much for me. To me, it almost didn't feel like it pushed the story along.
Yes. And my theory is because this is one of her earlier books. And I think the initial instinct for a lot of romance writers, especially new ones, is to include as much spice as you possibly can. Because when they're reading it, that's like they love those parts. They absolutely love it. So if I love that much, then the more I put into my book, the better it's going to be. But that's not true. The reality is that it's a storytelling tool. It's there to further character, further plot. It's there to serve a purpose. Sometimes it's there to demonstrate a moment of growth or a moment of change, or it's there to facilitate some event that's going to happen. In this book, it's not doing that. Not past their like first couple of interactions with one another. And I think that can really affect the pacing of this book. At times, it can feel slow and it can feel long, and it's not. It's not a long book at all. It's quite short, but because there's nothing really happening, nothing of actual value or consequences happening, um, it feels superfluous. It feels a bit pointless, and so you don't get the satisfaction from reading it because there's no build up, there's none earned around it. It's just sort of there for the sake of being there. And I think that's just like an early fumble of, a relatively new romance writer, which Rachel Reid would have been at this point writing this book. So that's my own personal belief. I believe spice is great when it serves a purpose, when it's sort of emotionally driven. I think you get the more satisfying sort of scenes that way. Obviously, build up and anticipation, all that's important. But ultimately, it needs to serve a purpose within the story.
Yeah, I can hear where you're coming from. Like, I haven't read a lot of sex scenes in romances, and so I appreciated reading this. But I also, whilst reading it, thought it's quite tame. It's quite vanilla. And I don't know whether maybe I had expectations of it being really saucy, really
Mm.
extreme, and maybe that does happen in other books or, with other authors, or maybe that's just the impression I got from like lots of our viewers giving us sort of feedback on like the AO3 universe. But I thought
Hmm.
I could picture everything that they were doing, and it felt, yeah, like I can see that happening.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think because they're both quite vanilla characters to begin with. Like Scott and Kip are not like overly sexually adventurous people. They won't come across that way anyway. So I think it's actually true to their characters that their sex is just very, it's just sex. It's good. It has emotional meaning to them. But it's not like whips and chains and um Rihanna S&M. Like it's nothing like that. But it's still quite it's believable within the context of their relationship. If you are looking for really intense sort of sex scenes, I have book recommendations for that if you want. But I don't find Rachel Reid does that style very often. More so with Ilya and Shane, I think you find stuff like that. But in general, I don't think she's that kind of writer. I don't think her like sex scenes in her books aren't very intense. They don't come across very intense. Um, like there are offers like Nyla K will be one where her sex scenes are like, whoa, oh wow, okay, well, like we're kicked into high gear here. She would be one that would be quite like that. Um, but Rachel Reid, not so much, not so much. I don't think.
Mm. And one thing, as you were talking, I was reminded of when I was reading the book was, and again, I'm going to be a little crude, so if you're sensitive, forward the next 30 seconds. But there's one point, firstly, can I say, Scott in the book bottoms first.
Yeah, yeah. I think
I thought that was really interesting.
yeah, I think because people have it in their head that the bigger, stronger, more muscled, athletic guy is always the top. Um, but Scott is also the more emotionally fragile and inexperienced and naive of the two. So in an emotional sense, it definitely does sort of, I don't know, it sort of lends itself to the idea that he would be the bottom. And as he gains more experience and more confidence in what he's doing, he's more likely to top. Um, yeah, I think that was an interesting choice. I think there's a bit of characterization in that. Yeah.
Whereas in the TV show, he tops first, and I think they are both verse in the TV show,
Yeah.
and they both are verse in the book as well. But also, there was one point where I did chuckle to myself, where Kip is like, or one of the characters is like, go harder or something. I'm like, this is the first time you've bottomed in months. There is no way in hell you're telling someone to go hard right from the beginning. I'm sorry. No way is that happening. Like, I don't care how much lube you're using.
Who knows? For all we know, he had been preparing himself, um, which he might have done. You
Maybe.
never know. Um, no, I do take your point though. Yeah, I think inevitably you're gonna have little moments of that whenever you have a sort of female writer writing romance. Sometimes they're just gonna get some things a little wrong. I actually find most of them are like very accurate for people who've never partaken. But you do find that there are moments when it's like, mm, don't see that. I don't see that. No, I don't. I don't
Well,
understand that position that you got them into. That doesn't seem quite realistic.
yeah, exactly. And there was one point in one of the sex scenes, again in the first half of Game Changer, where Scott wants Kip to perform for him. And it took me to the hotel scene in the TV show with Ilya and Shane,
Yeah.
where, and it felt almost like a mirrored scene, just with different characters. So in the TV show, you have Ilya
Mm,
sitting on the chair and Shane fingering himself, whereas in the book, you have Scott watching Kip masturbate and
yeah.
touch himself. And
Hmm.
I thought, I wondered if that was intentional to pull it out and put it in a different scene in the
Mm,
TV show. And I thought that was I quite liked the use of that.
yeah. I think in the book Heated Rivalry book, there's also a similar scene to that. Um, so, but I get why your mind went there. I think for Rachel Reid, you'll find a lot of romance offers will build up what characters are going to do in terms of sex throughout the book. So they'll start off with like hand jobs, and then it'll move on to blow jobs, and then it'll move on to sort of voyeuristic sort of things, sexting each other, and then you get proper sex, and then you're swapping positions, and there's like a progression typically that you'll see in MM romance whenever it comes to like sex. And I think she follows a certain formula, so she does. And I think you'll notice that she does it with the other characters as well as we're moving throughout the series. Um, but yeah, I didn't really think about it now until you sort of made me think about it. But yeah, there's definitely a formula. She has a formula for how she progresses sex in her books. And like nearly every MM romance author does. Um, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because, and there seems to, and to Rachel's credit, there seems to in one of the scenes where, and I can't remember if it's Scott giving Kip a blowjob or the other way around. I think it is Scott giving Kip a blowjob, where there's this hurriedness, and they allude to when Scott might have done this before. It might have been like, when he's in Torremolinos or in Ibiza or whatever, wherever
Yeah,
he's traveling in summer, and there's this rush to it. And there's this moment where they both sort of attune to each other and they slow it down. And I thought that was a really nice moment, because how often when you're hooking up with someone is it sort of this rush, and often let's do this as quick as possible sometimes,
yeah.
and to
Mhm.
to acknowledge that and then slow it down, because now you get this emotional attachment, you
Yeah,
get this
yeah,
emotional layering, and it's like, no, 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 we're in your apartment, we don't have to rush this.
yeah. We can take our time with it. We don't need to. You're not trying to get rid of me as quick as you can so that you can move on with your life. It's like, no, we're enjoying each other's company. We're enjoying being together. We're getting satisfaction out of that. It's not just about getting off as quick as you can. It's not just about instant release. It's about the build up. It's about the emotional connection. It's being with someone that you enjoy being around. So there's less urgency needed to basically be with each other in a sense. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely
Yeah.
feel that. Yeah.
And I
Mm.
wonder if that comes across in Rachel's storytelling and writing, at least in this book. We've
Mm.
got these two characters. We don't have to rush it. There's
Yeah.
lots that we can talk about, and maybe there's a nice symbolism there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is definitely intentional anyway. I think that's slowing it down. The fact that Scott is only ever doing hookups and he can only do it like when he's far away in foreign countries and no one knows who hockey players actually are. Like that's, you know, taking the time to lend a bit of thought to that is clever story writing. I think she really picked up on something that's very important there. And I did really enjoy that element of it. I thought it was a nice little detail that she included. Um, but yeah, I think so far, when comparing the book to the show, there are elements of the book which are really strong. And I feel like maybe the show didn't have time to sort of delve into because they condensed it like, so tightly. Um, but there are definitely elements then of the book that the show elevates and turns it into something much more meaningful. Um, in terms of sort of things that you would perhaps like to have seen differently in the book, do you have any thoughts?
That's tricky because I'm only halfway through, and
Yes.
and in my head, I'm really trying to put the TV show to one side. It's really hard to do that.
Hmm.
And I'm almost trying to be reintroduced to these characters as if I didn't know who they already were. And actually, that's something I wanted to ask you, because I'm coming to this from a very much TV lens. And so I want to know what it was like for you to have read this without a preconceived image or storyline or prior knowledge. What was that like for you?
So basically, just as I read it as a book, I actually didn't love this book. I wasn't in love with it at all. Um, I think there are better versions of this. So there are by other authors. Which is not to say that Rachel Reid is a bad writer. I don't think she is. But there are elements of this book that don't work for me. Um, and perhaps we'll get more into that whenever you finished it. Um, Particularly, it was actually Kip's character I had a lot of gripe with. I felt he was too passive. He was too easily led. He didn't stand up for himself. He had a lot of internal complaints rather than voicing them out loud. And a lot of the sort of refusal to communicate trope. And I don't like that. I don't think that works for me. But whenever I reread this, I had a new appreciation for it, and a new appreciation for certain elements that Rachel Reid writes into it that really, really make it work. Like, it's hard to say because you've not finished the book, so I'm going to save a lot of that for then. But as for now, yeah, I liked the book. I wasn't in love with it. I thought it was competently written, but that it had issues and flaws. And that if I was to give the option to reread it, would I? No, not necessarily. Now, obviously, because the show has come out, I've changed my tune on that. But now that I've reread it again, would I reread it for a third time? Probably not. Probably not, no. I think it does what it does pretty well. But for me, I've read other books that are very similar but are better. And that sort of sticks with me a wee bit.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely can see that. Because for me, coming into this, and we were having a chat just generally, and you were asking me what my thoughts about the book were, and I was kind of on the fence. And I saw you smile, and I was like, it's okay. Like, I like it because I like the TV show. I don't know if I would have loved it straight away had I not seen the TV show and just read this on its own. And I know you gave this like a 3 out of 5 stars, back in the day when you first read it. And I will say that Declan is very patient with me because I'm a very slow reader, and I keep getting nudges from Declan, which I appreciate, by the way. But I am a naturally slow reader because I'm reading, journal articles on top of everything else. And and I'm going to get roasted, but it's taken me almost 2 years to finish Song of Achilles. I know. I know, sacrilegious. But speaking of the book club, please do join us. I think we're at Heated Rivalry currently. So if you are reading it for the first time or you're rereading it, feel free to join us. There are notes and thoughts that people have contributed to, and I was reading them the other day, and oh my gosh, like some of the comments are so insightful and things that I haven't thought about. So it's been so lovely to see this community grow. So, if you haven't joined us already and you're thinking about it, just join. Search Long Game Pod on Fable or use the link in the description that I'll put down below.
Yeah, definitely do, and feel free to interact. Typically what happens is we'll open a discussion at 6 p.m. on a Sunday, 6 p.m. GMT, so that's sort of London, Lisbon sort of centre time. And then we'll just allow people to chat about the first half of the book. And then we'll give people another week then to finish the other half of the book. So that's sort of the structure that we're going with here. But it's really fun. People are so creative in the way in which they visualize the book and visualize the ideas of it and the characters and come up with really clever ideas behind it. Really insightful stuff. And I've had such a fun time sort of reading comments. I'm a lurker, by the way. You might think I'm not interacting, but I'm lurking. I'm lurking in the background. I'm reading all your comments. But yeah, definitely try it out. It's on Fable, and yeah, definitely give it a try. It's great.
Yeah. And so this was part 1 of our Game Changers episode. So in the next episode, I will have read the whole book finally, and we'll go on to the second half of the book and maybe some of the bigger themes that emerge from it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that sounds good. But for now, that's us. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I know a lot of you are waiting to sort of hear our thoughts when comparing the book to the TV show, and we're excited to now be able to do that. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a comment, share it. Don't be afraid to join the Fable as well. Keep an eye out on TikTok for some of our clips and things like that there. And yeah, like, subscribe wherever you are, and just enjoy for more content. We'll be bringing out part 2 next week.